Hello everyone, this is Professor Fetterman from Montclair State. Here in Chapter 4, we're only going to be discussing one section, 4.3. We're going to be talking about public goods. Sometimes the marketplace won't provide enough of certain kinds of items because they have certain characteristics, and as a result, if the private market can't provide it, we need a public marketplace. We said that when we have an efficient market, it's going to operate where supply and demand meet. We would maximize the consumer surplus and maximize the producer surplus as a result. But there are times when you might produce less than the optimal amount. When you produce less than the optimal amount, there is a loss of value to society called the deadweight loss or efficiency loss. Now we're going to take a look at some examples of when the marketplace doesn't produce enough of very particular kinds of products. Public goods are not the same as private goods. An ear of corn is not the same thing as a fireworks display, which has different characteristics from a public highway. They're not created equal. If someone like Joe buys and eats an ear of corn, he had to pay for it. And no one else can eat the same ear of corn. It's used up. It's Joe's possession. If Keisha enjoys a fireworks display, it doesn't prevent someone else like Miguel from enjoying it. And it's free. Very difficult to figure out how to get people to pay for a fireworks display. You just have to look up in the sky. And then finally, if you use a highway like Muhammad, unless the highway is completely jammed, it doesn't prevent someone else from using it like Phoebe. And it might cost money because you might be able to put a toll on it. So there might be a way to get people to pay for it. So all goods are different, and there are certain aspects of fireworks displays or public highways that make it difficult to stop people from using it and make it difficult to get people to pay for it. So let's specifically now look at the difference between private goods and public goods. An ear of corn versus a fireworks display. Private goods have something called rivalry. If someone buys and consumes a product, it's not available to a rival, someone else. Automobiles, classic example. You buy an automobile, it's no longer available for someone else to buy it. If someone buys and consumes a product like a fireworks display, it's still available for someone else. It's available to a rival. It has non-rivalry. You don't exclude rivals from consuming the product. Streetlights, great example. If you put a light out in the front of your property, everybody who passes by gets to enjoy the light from it. In addition, private goods are excludable. You can prevent people that don't pay for a product from obtaining its benefits. It's very easy. You put a price tag on it, someone's got to buy it. Public goods are non-excludable. There's no easy way to prevent people from obtaining a product's benefit. In a pure public good, it's completely non-excludable. You have an ability to maybe charge a toll on a road, but most roads you don't have that ability, so most roads are non-excludable. Again, now let's review. Public goods have non-rivalry. If someone buys and consumes a product, it's still available to a rival. There's no easy way to prevent people from obtaining a product's benefits. It's non-excludable. You can't non-rivalry, you can't stop someone from consuming it, and non-excludable, you can't figure out a way to get people to pay for it. So therefore we have a problem. The product's available to all because of non-rivalry. There's no easy way to keep people from benefiting because it's non-excludable, and therefore most people enjoy the product without paying. And we call this problem the free rider problem. People get to use a good even though they didn't pay for it. So with the free rider problem, how do we end up with traffic lights, and how do we end up with things like fireworks displays? Let's see if we can think of some public goods where people either have the ability to consume it even though someone else has consumed it, or there's very difficult ways of making people to pay. Here are some examples. Highways, police, Now, you can have your own private security force, but that would never provide enough. National defense, it's impossible to have your own private army. Libraries originally made people pay to rent a book. Environmental protection is a big one. If you want to breathe clean air, well, how do you get that? Snow plowing, street lights, there are lots of examples of goods that are public. Some of these have ways to collect tolls, but most do not. So the solution is government and taxes. How much of a good should we provide? And now we have to do an analysis. We have to determine the demand for a public good, and to do that we do a marginal benefit analysis. We compare it to the marginal cost, very similar to where supply and demand meet. We want to know the demand for a public good, and then we want to know what it's going to cost, sort of like the supply curve. And we want to try and be where the marginal benefit and marginal cost meet. Because a product is available to everyone, we need to assess everyone's willingness to pay for a public good, and then add them together if we could. Streetlights. So let's take a look. We've got a table here, demand for a public good, and we'll look at two individuals and what they're willing to pay. In column 1, we've got quantities of the public good: 1 streetlight, 2 streetlights, 3 streetlights. Adam's willing to pay $4 for the first streetlight, so then he'll have a little bit of light on his street. And because of diminishing marginal utility, he'll pay 3 for the second light and 2 for the third. Add that to Benson's willingness to pay, and he'll pay $5 for that street light, first one, because he really values having a little light on his street, 4 for the second one. So we see both Adam and Benson have diminishing marginal utility. They're paying less to get additional lighting on the street. Now we add up everyone's ability to pay, what they think it's worth, not ability to pay, what they're willing to pay to get the number of units of public goods. So collectively, they're willing to pay $9 for the first street light, $7 for the second one, and so on. In a private good, we added the quantities demanded at each price. So he said, how much would you be willing to pay at $4? And that's what the demand would be. Here we sum up the price for each quantity. So we're not looking at a private good analysis where we add the quantity demanded at each price, and that's the demand. We're saying for one street light, what will you pay? 4 plus 5 is $9. We now have the total money that the community, Adam and Ben, are willing to pay, and now let's graph it. Adam's demand, we see that at a price of $3, he'd want to buy 2 streetlights. At a price of $1, he'd be willing to pay that for the 4th streetlight. Ben, at $4, would want 2 streetlights, and at $2, Ben would want to have 4 streetlights. He'd only pay $2 for the 4th streetlight. We take up everyone's demand, we sum these vertically, so we sum it for the quantity. For 2 streetlights, we're willing to pay 3 and 4, so a total of 7. For 4, we're willing to pay 1 and 2 for a total of 3. Here's our collective demand if we could figure it out. The supply curve is upward sloping because we said as we want to make more of any goods, we've got rising marginal costs. Now in the real world, what's the cost of a street light? You can probably buy them for $1,000, and the next one costs $1,000, and the next one costs $1,000. Somewhere though, that supply curve is going to hit the demand curve. We're going to end up with some intersection of supply and demand, and that's how many we should make. The optimal quantity for society. If we could determine everybody's demand, and if we knew what the supply curve was. The optimal amount is determined by the intersection of our supply and demand here. At equilibrium, the marginal benefit, which is reflected by the demand curve, and the marginal cost reflected by the supply curve meet. Now in the real world, it's a little more difficult. We try to figure out what the benefit is to society, and we know what the cost of a lot of these projects are. We know what it costs to put up streetlights. Then we try to figure out what the benefit is. And here an analysis can be done, like if we have more streetlights, we have less crime. If we have more streetlights, we have less automobile accidents at night. we can figure out what that benefit is. We want to produce an amount where supply and demand are equal. Again, supply curve stands in for marginal cost, the demand curve stands in for marginal benefit. We need a way to quantify this marginal benefit. Much easier to quantify the marginal cost. You can figure out how much a road costs, you can figure out how much a street light costs, you can figure out how much it costs to have a military. Then you have to figure out what the benefit is. The benefit, the marginal benefit, is the extra satisfaction you get from more public goods. The cost, the loss of satisfaction from the decline in output of private goods. What does that mean? When the government builds a road, is there a decline in private goods? Well, in theory, there is. Where does the government get the money from? They get it from taxes. And when they take that tax money away from people, people have less money to buy private goods. All right, so cost-benefit analysis for a highway. We try and figure out what it's worth in terms of saving gas because you can drive faster, you don't have to wait in traffic and burn extra gas. You have safer highways, so fewer accidents. It's clearly a public good. It's certainly, well, it is excludable. You can put a toll on it, but let's assume it's a free highway. And when you use it, non-rivalry, it doesn't stop someone else from using it. The cost, mostly the cost of construction. The benefits, improved transportation, less time in traffic, etc. And there's something important to notice about benefits. The costs are almost all immediate, the cost of building the road, but the benefits can go on for years and years. So economists have to figure out a present value of these benefits. And again, it's a very complicated analysis. But in the end, why do we build the road? If we think the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost to society. Let's take a look at an example. Here we've got a table. We're looking at the cost-benefit analysis for a national highway project in billions. We have 5 different alternatives. We can do no new construction. We can widen the existing highway, put in a 2-lane, 4-lane, or a 6-lane highway. We've got the estimated cost of the projects going up. In column 2, we see the total cost. In column 3, we're going to calculate the marginal cost, which is the change in total cost. So when we go from no construction to a widen the existing highway, it costs us an extra 4. But if instead we want to build a 2-lane highway, it's going to cost us an extra 6. We then try to figure out what the total benefit is. And now here it's very complicated. Economists and people who work for the local government will try and figure out how much gas that people are going to save by being able to drive on a better road, how many fewer potholes are there so people will have less broken axles. They take all of this into effect and they take a look in the future and they try and figure out what the total benefit is. We then can figure out the marginal benefits as we go from one plan to the next plan. For here, going from a 2-lane highway to a 4-lane highway, we go from 13 in benefit to 23, which is a change in 10. The net benefit is listed in column 6. We see if we go from no construction to widening the highway, it's a net benefit of 1. The benefit is 5, but the marginal cost is 4. If we keep improving the highway, the marginal benefit to go from A to B is 8 versus 6. Going from B to C, the marginal benefit goes to 10, where the cost is 8. We keep going as long as the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. The marginal benefit for highway number C, the 4-lane highway, is 10, but the marginal cost is 8. We don't get much of an additional benefit by going to Plan D, a 6-lane highway. We only get 3 more units of extra benefit, but it costs us an extra 10. What's the last project we should do then? Project C. Because it gives us a marginal benefit of 10 and a marginal cost of only 8. Again, these numbers are very difficult to determine. We can understand what the cost of a highway is. Figuring out what the benefit is a much more complicated analysis. So we end up with the 4-lane highway. There are certain goods now which are slightly different. These are privately provided public goods. When you use Google, there's no charge to you. Who's paying for it? Advertisers. When you watch television, and if you have free broadcast television, which almost nobody has anymore, who pays for it? The advertisers. Same thing with radio. Facebook. Facebook is free to the users. Who pays for it? Advertisers. We're not going to get into much more any more detail on that, just to notice that there are certain goods where the analysis becomes more difficult because you have a third party privately paying for what is essentially a public good. They're non-rivalry and non-excludability. All of these are both non-rival and non-excludable, but the production costs are covered by a related private good advertising. Just bringing this up as a topic, we're not going to really say anything more about it here in this course. There are also a large section of goods known as quasi-public goods. They have some of the properties of public goods. Private schools. Right here nearby Montclair, you can go to MKA or St. Cassian School. Toll roads. We figure out a way to make people pay for the Turnpike in the Garden State. Police and fire protection. You can have your own private security guards. And lots of famous celebrities have their own security. But clearly, people wouldn't be able to afford their own police force. They're all available in the private sector because they're excludable. We can figure out a way to make people pay for them. But you wouldn't make enough of them. Benefits of the quasi-public goods extend beyond the buyers. The private system simply won't produce enough. What's the benefit of private schools to other people? Fewer people attending public school. What's the benefit of people having their own security protection? Well, if your neighbor has their own private security force, you don't have to worry about someone breaking into your house because you live right next door. Government often provides these services to make sure that we are producing where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. We talked about in Chapter 2 the circular flow model, but what's missing here? We don't see government, so I've made small little adaptations to this graph. From the resource market to the household market, and from the product market to the, in the product market, the intersection going from businesses to households, government takes tax money away from households and businesses, so the money that flows through as people are buying resources, as you're getting your pay, the government takes some of that money away. Households have less money, and therefore they buy fewer goods because some of the money that was coming to them through the resource market got siphoned away in terms of taxes. The government uses that tax revenue to buy public goods from businesses. So the government takes the money away from households, but then spends it to buy the goods. Government takes taxes from households, uses that money to buy public goods. So it's in addition to what we talked about in Chapter 2 in terms of circular flow. Tax revenue flows into the government. Public goods and services flow into the government. And then the government distributes these public goods and services. Here's a list of the bullet point topics from 4.3. If you want to hit pause for a minute and read through them, I'm not going to read them to you. If you continue on and take an intermediate level macroeconomics class, there's a lot more to talk about in public goods. They have a lot more properties besides non-rivalry and non-excludability. So it's a very interesting topic. It's something that the private marketplace can't produce enough of these goods. So there's a lot more things to talk about. But for the purpose of an introductory class, this is where I want to stop the discussion. This is Professor Fetterman. I will see you in the next video.